welcome to Daily Debrief brought to you by People's Dispatch. I am Shriya. The United States has launched airstrikes in eastern Syria. US claims that these come after an unmanned drone attack on US base took place on March 23. Meanwhile, diplomats from Philippines and China meet amidst rising tensions between the two countries over maritime issues. And finally, India's main opposition leader Rahul Gandhi has been disqualified as a member of parliament over a defamation case from 2019. US forces carried out a number of airstrikes inside Syria on Thursday, March 23, after accusing Iran-backed groups of carrying out a drone attack on one of its bases in Hasaka in northeastern Syria. Though there are some reports of deaths caused by the US airstrikes, there are no confirmed reports and numbers yet. The US had claimed that at least one contractor was killed and 6 others were injured in the drone strike on Thursday. 5 of the injured are US soldiers. The US Defense Ministry's statement claimed that the drone involved in the attack was of Iranian origin. We are joined by Abdul from People's Dispatch with the latest on this issue. Thank you for joining us in the studio, Abdul. First off, what has happened and can you take us through the sequence of events that took place last night?
Well, US Minister of Defense claimed that one of the bases in Hasaka in northeastern Syria was attacked by a drone, and in which one US contractor was killed and 6 others were injured. Out of these 6, 5 of them were US soldiers. And in a kind of, after this attack, the US forces took out airstrikes in eastern Syria, in Deir ez-Zor province, which basically borders with Iraq. And the US Minister of Defense claimed that they targeted structures which are used by the quote-unquote Iran-backed group. The statement clearly mentions that Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps forces were attacked, were the target. As we all know, US and US allies have long claimed for a very long time that there are Syrian forces present on the ground in Syria. Iranian forces are present on ground in Syria, and they are basically aiding the anti-US or anti-Israeli forces there, and they are basically a threat to their security. That has been a long-standing claim. Of course, both Syrians and Iranians have denied all those claims, and in fact, Iranians have claimed that they are there, of course, but it is not a military operation. They are there as an advisory to the Syrian government. Anyway, so the US government claimed that this is the attack basically was against the Iranian-backed groups. And though, as you rightly pointed out, the numbers have not been confirmed, there is a Syrian observatory which is based in UK claimed that 8 Syrian forces have been killed, Iran-backed militias have been killed, but of course that number is disputable. The reports from the local media does not talk about any number, and there are reports that it is not the fighters who have been killed, it is primarily the civilians, because the target of the attack was not any installment which is used by the forces or the fighters, but the civilian infrastructure, such as the rural development mission and other such facilities. So this has been the chain of event since last night. Yeah.
Right, Abdul. And in a previous episode, we were talking about how US has maintained an illegal presence in the West Asia region for roughly a decade. Can you give us a background of what this presence has looked like and meant for civilians, for example, in Syria?
Well, that is the important question. It seems that US Ministry of Defense is claiming that their forces, the presence of their forces in Syria is something which is a legitimate presence. Their statement claims that no attacks against the US forces will go without punishment and so on and so forth, as if their presence is legitimate. It is not legitimate. It is, as Syrians say, it is basically an occupation. The US forces in Syria are there without any invitation. They claim that they're fighting against the Islamic State terrorist group, but according to their own admittance, their own claims, ISIS has been defeated years ago, and therefore there is no legitimate, even there from their own point of view, there is no basis for their presence in Syria.
Right.
So the US forces have been there primarily to basically what Syrian government is claiming is to basically prolong the ongoing war in the country. The US forces have been accused of aiding, providing military support, providing armaments, providing training to anti-Bashar al-Assad forces. And they have also been accused by Syrians of looting their natural resources, primarily oil. Billions of dollars of oil have been smuggled out from Syria. We should see the map and remember that the US bases or US-backed forces are operative in areas which in Syria which are primarily the oil-producing regions of Syria. And Syria, and there are various reports in different media which establishes the fact that the Syrian oil has been smuggled out to Iraq and to other places. In fact, in 2019, Trump, when he was the president, claimed that their forces need to be there in US to protect the Syrian oil resources from going into the hands of the Bashar al-Assad, which is the legitimate government in Syria. So this is not something which is hidden, it is openly admitted also, and therefore it is quite obvious that their presence is illegitimate, and attacks on such illegitimate presence is basically a right to resistance. So all the claims by the US that this attack on their bases, on their forces in Syria is violation, is a violation of the or basically attack on US sovereignty is basically not true. It is primarily a resistance against the US occupation. That's what Syria claims. That's what the non-state actors active in different parts of Syria claim, that they are basically fighting against the occupation. And this is not only in Syria. We have talked about the occupation in Iraq. We have talked about presence of US forces in different other parts of the West Asia region and in other parts of the world, of course. So that is a part of the larger US imperialist games.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode, Abdul. Diplomats from Philippines and China met this week amidst rising tensions between the countries in South China Sea. The two countries have agreed to solve the contentions over maritime issues in peaceful manner. In a related development, China's defense ministry has expressed strong concerns over a US warship illegally entering into China's territorial water around Parasil Islands. We are now joined by Anish from People's Dispatch, who has the latest details on the developing story. Glad to have you back with us, Anish. Thank you for joining us. So first off, the question is, what is the significance behind this meeting between the diplomats from the two countries?
Yeah, so it is significant in the sense that this was essentially China's way of, extending a peaceful arm to Philippines, because as we have seen recently, and we have also talked about it on the show, Philippines has taken to a very strongly pro-US tilt in the recent months, especially since Marcos Jr. has taken over the presidency. We saw that in recent set of military drills that have happened, or the kind of statements that Marcos Jr. has made, or for that matter, the fact that very recently the Philippine president announced just this week the new locations, or the general the general areas in which the new military facilities for the US will be located in the Philippines, and that includes Palawan. Palawan is that area which is the closest to the disputed region between Philippines and China in the South China Sea. So any US presence in that area is going to only further escalation and also further any kind of tensions that might That, of course, it will escalate tensions between the US and China, but also between the China and the Philippines. So this is something that China wants to avoid because Philippines is one of its neighbors. It is a key party to the South China, the multilateral dispute in the South China Sea, which includes like about a dozen nations at this point. And the fact that one of them is taking a very clearly partisan stand in this emerging tensions in the region is going to obviously put a spanner in any effort to actually broker peace and resolution that can have a long-lasting impact in the region. And this is something that China wants to avoid. We're not sure the outcomes of this, but the statements that they made today actually showed us that there is some level of seriousness in the talks. Obviously, it is obviously a high level talk because we're talking about a vice minister of foreign affairs and a deputy undersecretary of foreign affairs having a meeting with each other. But obviously, we have to look forward to more concrete talks between heads of governments, and that will have to wait. But there is definitely a certain level of seriousness, and this shows that China is, ready to exhaust all diplomatic resources before it can escalate any kind of tensions in the region.
Right, and Anish, when talking about US and China, the two have been engaged in a tug war of sorts in the South China Sea per se. What do the latest developments indicate in that direction?
Yes, some of the latest developments have been quite alarming, to say the least. We've already seen a U.S. warship, floating through what China claims to be its own territory. Obviously, we can always, claim that South China Sea is a disputed region, so no one country, but can actually lay claim. But even in that sense, the United States was moving through territorial waters that has been claimed by another country, and especially it was floating a warship, much less through those waters. And we already saw the kind of statements made by the United States, where it's saying that it has some navigational freedom in the region, and it was asserting its navigational freedom in the region, which does not really, which is not how navigation freedom works. It does not talk about freedom to go through territorial waters. Neither does it talk about freedom of warships or military ships in any kind of seas, for that matter. So, but nevertheless, the US has an extensive military presence in the region. It is expanding that presence. We are already seeing, with the kind of statements and joint military drills that is happening in South Korea, the kind of arrangements that it is pushing for in Japan, and obviously, of course, Philippines. There is definitely a clear sign, a clear indication that the United States wants to not only expand its military prowess in the region, but also wants to sort of prepare for conflict in the region. It has created very convenient. It always had these convenient flashpoints, but now these flashpoints are becoming major source of contention in the region. We are already seeing tensions being extremely high in the Korean Peninsula. We are already seeing Taiwan becoming the focal point of a sort of this global Cold War that the US and its allies is trying to wage against China and its friends in the region. And this only creates more problems if they're trying to use, warships and its military bases in the region as, sources of provocations. And we need to always be careful when stuff like this happens, because not really brush aside the concerns that countries like China has been raising, not only about its own sovereignty, but also the fact that the US, which has no stakes, be it territorial or sovereign, in the region, is making military maneuvers in a region that generally did not have the kind of conflict that the rest of the world has been going through. And so these sort of provocations and escalations are something that really needs to be taken seriously. And we need to also look at how the two countries are trying to deal with it differently. While China is trying to exhaust diplomatic resources, the US is essentially expanding its military presence in the region. So we can already see the kind of differences that is happening already. And so these tensions are going to keep escalating as long as there is no scope for talks or or even uh, just bare minimum communication that can avoid such provocations. Something like that. If it doesn't happen, that is going to keep escalating these tensions.
Thank you so much for joining us, Anish. On March 24, India's main opposition leader and former president of Congress party Rahul Gandhi was disqualified from his position as member of parliament. The development comes shortly after Gandhi was convicted in a defamation case and sentenced to 2 years in jail. Political experts and the opposition have slammed the Modi government for misusing law to silence any form of criticism. We're joined by Pragya, who has more details on this story. Pragya, thank you for joining us. First off, what is this defamation case against Rahul Gandhi?
Shreya, so in an election speech which Rahul Gandhi, who's the Congress leader, like you said, had given a speech which basically he tried to make fun of the Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The device that he used to make fun of him was to use the family name Modi and to link it with other people in India who are either absconding on charges of fraud, financial fraud, and other such charges, who share the same family name. So a BJP, a leader from the Prime Minister's party, decided to file a criminal defamation suit against him, which means that he could go to jail. And there's a parallel, a related provision in the Representation of People Act of India, which decides, how elections are conducted and who can contest and so on and so forth. Under that law, if you are sentenced, if you're convicted in a case where the punishment is longer than 2 years, then you stand to be disqualified. Later on, the Supreme Court in subsequent judgments has said that, look, if you are convicted for 2 years in a criminal case, then your disqualification from the public office, that is of a legislator in a state or as a member of parliament, you are immediately disqualified. And that is what has happened to Rahul Gandhi because of the speech that he made, in which he was, we can say he was making fun of the Prime Minister's name. And he used the name which is the same as the BJP leader's name, which he argued in the court was, sort of insulting and defamatory. And the court in Gujarat, which happens to be the Prime Minister's home state and the BJP leader's home state, has decided that, well, it is defamation and awarded him the maximum sentence, that's 2 years.
Right. And also, what can be the implications of Rahul Gandhi's removal as MP? Can you also give us a background of what's been happening with regards to politics in India in the recent months? Does it have a role to play?
Yes, a lot of people are going to say that what is happening to opposition parties under the present dispensation, which is led by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Bharatiya Janata Party, that Rahul Gandhi's conviction is well in tune with that somehow or the other you find that the opposition leaders are constantly in the crosshairs of either investigative agencies like the Central Bureau of Investigation. They are accused of tax fraud. This is not to say that they're innocent or guilty, but that there seem to be a very large number of cases which the opposition leaders and the parties are facing, and there will be a constituency of people who will think that, yes, this is in line with that. The other thing is that there has been a lot of discussion in India in the run-up to the 2024 national election, which will decide whether or not, it will decide a lot of things, but whether or not the Prime Minister and his party return to power and the kind of majority they get or don't get are very crucial questions for India right now. So there's been a lot of discussion whether the opposition can get together and provide a sort of joint force to tackle the right-wing majoritarian forces that this government has unleashed on the country. And maybe, just maybe, this could be one of the many triggers, but a big trigger, because Rahul Gandhi's party was the second largest party in the last two elections. Although it has declined significantly in terms of the votes it gets, it also presents a sort of ideological alternative to the Hindutva right-wing nationalist party in power right now. So will it galvanize the opposition leaders together or not, is going to be a big outcome of this ruling. And the disqualification itself also means that one of the voices is not going to be present in parliament who constantly sort of issues these barbs and raises questions about the government, what it's doing and not doing. So we're still going to have to see how the opposition responds to this. There is another important question which, I suppose the lawyers are going to have to think over it, which is that in case Rahul Gandhi secures a reversal of this Surat court's, this Gujarat court's verdict against him, then what would happen to his disqualification then? You see, because if you start a process of having a new election in Rahul Gandhi's constituency today, because he's disqualified, then if at a later date a court says that, well, we don't uphold this disqualification, then you have a very anomalous sort of a situation. But that, I suppose, the government has decided, the treasury benches have decided they can put off that question for later.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode, Pragya. And that's all we have for today. For more such stories, keep watching peoplesdispatch.org. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter.